Coming up, North Korea does it again as it fires 2 missiles into the East Sea. South Korean authorities still figuring out the details of the specific weapons. This also comes just hours after a United Nations Security Council emergency meeting on the North's launch a couple days ago. OPEC Plus announces a 2 million barrel a day cut in oil production starting November. This means oil prices are set to go up, but OPEC Plus countries say it's necessary in today's global economy, while U.S. President Joe Biden labels the move short-sighted. Plus, the EU approves an 8th round of sanctions on Russia. This includes a price cap on Russian oil exports by sea. The sanctions come in response to Russia's recent efforts to annex parts of Ukraine. Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. Just a couple of hours ago, North Korea fired yet another round of ballistic missiles, heightening tensions around the Korean peninsula. This comes just 2 days after the North fired a missile that flew over Japan and also has a range to hit the U.S. island of Guam. For more, we have Ji-young on the line for us. Ji-young, what do we know so far?
Toya, North Korea has fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff announced the launch on Thursday morning, saying that they were spotted at around 6 a.m. to 6:20 a.m., and the launch sites were from the area of Samseok in Pyongyang. Further details are still being analyzed, and the South Korean Army is working closely with the U.S. to be fully prepared for more provocations. According to Japan's NHK and Kyodo News, the Japanese government said the 2 ballistic missiles landed just outside of its exclusive economic zone. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida told reporters that the North's missile launch is totally unacceptable and urged the officials to swiftly provide details of the weapons to the public. This follows the North firing an intermediate-range ballistic missile on Tuesday from Mupyeongri in its northern province of Jagang, its first IRBM launch in 8 months. That missile traveled roughly 4,600 kilometers over Japan before falling into the Pacific Ocean. It has a long enough range to strike the U.S. territory of Guam. This also marks Pyongyang's 6th launch of missiles in just 12 days, ratcheting up tensions on the Korean peninsula.
So now we know that following the North's ballistic missile launch 2 days ago, the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan has made a U-turn to come back to the East Sea.
Yes, that's right, Doyeon. Some say North Korea's missile launch on Thursday is in response to the USS Ronald Reagan's return to waters east of South Korea to join a trilateral exercise with Seoul and Tokyo. The U.S. aircraft carrier initially left the waters last week following a bilateral naval exercise with South Korea and trilateral drills, also including Japan. North Korea's foreign ministry said Thursday morning in a press release that the redeployment of the USS Ronald Reagan is causing serious threats around the Korean peninsula, and it is closely watching the situation. That's all I have for now, but I'll bring more updates in our later newscast. Back to you, Doyeon.
Thank you, Ji-young. Now, just a couple of hours before this latest launch, the UN Security Council convened an emergency meeting to discuss North Korea's test firing of a ballistic missile over Japan 2 days ago. Amid condemnation from the U.S. and the UN Secretary General, China and Russia pointed at Washington, who they say are guilty of provoking the regime. Kim Yo-sun has the latest.
The 15-member UNSC met on Wednesday to discuss a missile launched by North Korea on Tuesday that soared over Japan for the first time in 5 years. During the meeting, which was requested by Washington, ambassadors were briefed on the UN's response to the incident by the UN's Assistant Secretary General. He also added that Secretary General Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned the launch. Also at the meeting, the U.S. accused Beijing and Moscow of protecting Pyongyang from attempts to bolster international sanctions imposed against the regime.
The DPRK has enjoyed blanket protection from 2 members of this council. These 2 members have gone out of their way to justify the DPRK's repeated provocations and block every attempt to update the sanctions regime. In short, 2 permanent members of the Security Council have enabled Kim Jong-un.
The U.S. envoy also stressed that the U.S. remains committed to dialogue and diplomacy despite a lack of engagement from the North. At the same time, she underscored that Washington will not stand by as the regime directly threatens the U.S., its allies, and the rest of the world. In response, China called for the UNSC to play a more constructive role in dealing with the North Korean issue rather than resorting to pressure.
The Council's discussions and deliberations should contribute to a détente rather than fueling escalation. They should promote the resumption of dialogue instead of widening differences and forge unity instead of creating divisions.
Russia reiterated that imposing sanctions against the North is a, quote, dead end that brings 0 results.
We have stated many times and are repeating it again. Introducing new sanctions against the DPRK is a dead end. It's a measure which, as we already stated, is bringing us 0 results when it comes to the DPRK.
China and Russia have blamed the joint military drills conducted by Seoul and Washington for provoking the regime, but such remarks have been rejected by the U.S., who made clear that there is no equivalency between the 2 activities. The meeting ended with member states failing to come to make a joint statement condemning the North's provocation. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
U.S. President Joe Biden sent a letter to President Yoon expressing willingness to continue open-minded talks on the Inflation Reduction Act. According to Seoul's top office, the American leader acknowledged Yoon's concerns over the new rules on EV subsidies that would put South Korean automakers at a disadvantage.
President Biden also pledged to continue frank and open-minded discussions with Seoul on this matter. The letter from President Biden is based on the 2 leaders' multiple rounds of discussions regarding the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act in London and New York last month. We take this letter signed by the U.S. President himself as having expressed Washington's willingness to take into consideration the position of South Korean companies.
Biden expressed confidence that allies will work together to achieve joint goals. The letter to his South Korean counterpart was disclosed as the 2 nations carried out a joint response to North Korea's missile launch on Tuesday. President Yoon is reportedly set to hold phone talks with Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Thursday as well. The 2 leaders are expected to discuss joint responses to the regime's evolving missile and nuclear tests. The nation's prime minister downgraded the government's outlook for the economy next year, reflecting the rising interest rate environment globally. In Wednesday's cabinet meeting, Han Deok-soo said the economy will grow next year by 2.1%. Recently, the IMF and the OECD also lowered South Korea's forecast. But this is the first adjustment at the governmental level since the Yoon administration unveiled its main policies in June. For this year, the finance ministry expects an increase in the outlook to 2.7%. According to the PM, inflation has been coming down, but he raised concerns over volatility in the exchange rate and a more general economic slowdown. The OPEC Plus has announced the biggest cut to oil production since the start of the pandemic, saying that it will slash oil production by 2 million barrels per day. The reduction announced by the group of major oil producers, which includes Saudi Arabia and Russia, is around 2% of the global oil demand. The production cuts will begin next month, with OPEC member states set to meet again in December. The latest move comes despite repeated pressure from U.S. President Joe Biden, who asked the group to pump up more to lower fuel prices ahead of the country's midterm elections by early November. The White House called the decision short-sighted and said in a statement that the administration would deliver another 10 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to the market next month. The European Union has passed more sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. On Wednesday, local time, the EU executive body said that This 8th round of sanctions will put a price cap on Russian oil being transported by sea to third-party countries. In addition, the sanctions extend a ban on imports of Russian steel and steel products, among others. A new list of individuals has also been added to the sanctions list, as many Russian military officials have been accused of being responsible for the annexing of parts of Ukraine. In fact, the swift decision to approve this round of sanctions comes as Russia held what it claims was a referendum to annex parts of Ukraine and also showed it might possibly consider using nuclear weapons. The agreement for the sanctions is to be formalized by 8 a.m. GMT on Thursday if no EU country raises last-minute objections, as the decision has to be unanimous. Asia's biggest film event, the Busan International Film Festival, kicked off Wednesday evening. It's the first time in 3 years it's back in full. Kim Hyun-sung brings us the sights and sound from the hotly anticipated opener.
Asia's biggest film fiesta kicked off on Wednesday. Movie lovers streamed in to the vibrant port city of Busan for the 27th Busan International Film Festival. It's back in full for the first time in 3 years after the COVID-forced hiatus. Excitement buzzed in the air.
I looked around the venue and there seems to be so much to see and do. Now that the festival is back again, I really hope that Busan Film Festival goes further internationally.
Some of South Korea's and Asia's biggest on-screen talents also graced Busan's red carpet, including South Korean actors Song Kang-ho and Han Ji-min, internationally recognized Hong Kong actor Tony Leung Chiu-wai, and Thailand's beloved Mario Maurer. The festival is a 10-day-long movie frenzy, with more than 350 films screening on 30 screens near Busan's Haeundae Beach area. Most films here have been invited from overseas. Iranian film Scent of Wind opened the festival.
The Busan Film Festival has helped with the development and progress of Iranian cinema a lot. It's very important for Iranian cinema because in the festival they always try to keep the balance between the arts and letting the art breathe freely. It's not just about the storytelling films.
The Busan Film Festival has played a crucial role in fostering Asian cinema and promoting it to the world. Projects like Asia Cinema Fund, Asian Content and Film Market, Platform Busan, and Asia Contents Awards help well-deserving Asian films get funding and recognition.
Asian films are often undervalued by the public. The Busan Film Festival was made to break that. Our festival wants to show the world that there are these many voices in Asia, including Korea, and that our films do not fall behind.
Films from more than 70 countries worldwide have landed here in Busan. And Japanese film A Man, directed by Ishikawa Kei, will be closing this 10-day run. This festival will serve up a rich tapestry of films for cinema lovers to enjoy and will be a chance to rediscover some of Asia's most creative minds. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News, Busan.
South Korean Parliament convened its first parliamentary audit session of the Yoon administration this week. The committee that appears to be getting the most attention is the one for foreign affairs. So what's going on with the country's foreign policy and what lies ahead regarding the many important decisions President Yoon has to make in the near future? We have Professor Chung Gu-yeon, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Kangwon National University, with us this morning. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. How are you?
So first, the South Korean government is making efforts to repair the bilateral relationship with Japan. We saw a trilateral joint military exercise happen in the EC just last week, which included the U.S. How do you see the relationship unfolding going forward? Is the current administration approaching it correctly?
Well, improving relationship with Japan is important not only because we share problems in Northeast Asia, such as responding to North Korea's provocation in a timely manner, but also we share interest in maintaining rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. And President Yoon Suk-yeol emphasized this fact that South Korea's expansive role in the world since beginning of its presidential campaign. I believe repairing relationship with Japan is the first step to that end. So we'll be observing more of these activities like trilateral military exercise. And now we are actually joining this quadrilateral drills in Philippines, with the U.S., Japan, and Philippines as well. So I think we are in the right directions, and we'll be seeing South Korea participate in more of these regional activities in the future.
Right. Now we're talking about regional activities. The new government has continuously talked about playing a greater role in global affairs in general. And we just saw the EU slapping Russia with additional sanctions over its war with Ukraine. But we haven't heard much about South Korea joining in with additional sanctions. Should South Korea be doing more to join other countries in sanctioning Russia?
Well, as the war in Ukraine is predicted to last at least until the end of this year, so I think international community should show more united standing against Russia, more so as it attempts to conduct a nuclear corridor these days. And underlying assumption is that this is not just a European issue, but the entire world's security is at risk. So sanction could be one of those instruments that international community can adopt. But at the same time, South Korea needs to be more aware of these sanctions and employing and renewing the sanctions and exploring how international community is working on this issue, as South Korea's economy might be at risk for avoiding this sanction as well. And much broader implication could be by standing with European partners on this issue, South Korea could expand its diplomatic leverage in Northeast Asia as well. Given North Korea is tactically aligning with China and Russia at this moment, South Korea needs to expand its diplomatic alignment in and out of Northeast Asia.
Right, and there also has been criticism from the opposition party that the South Korean government didn't preemptively act against the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act due to its negative effects on South Korean automakers. How have other countries managed the situation? Now, a lot of other countries are subject to some of the negativities from the Inflation Reduction Act. Also, was there really a way for South Korean government to know what was going to happen?
Well, given the U.S. is now in the election cycle, midterm elections in November, and Democratic Party attempts to provide more of these policies and legislature that could attract more of their voters, given the lower approval rating of President Biden. So it must have been very difficult for any other countries, including South Korea, to respond preemptively, and this IRA is not an exception. And South Korea's response was not that later and actually much faster than any other countries in the world as well. So it is not an issue whether it was preemptively possible to respond or not, but now we have more time to respond before it becomes effective. And we need to think about how we can respond and manage it and reduce the kind of side effect and issues that might affect our companies investing in the United States.
Right, well, thank you again for your insights. I know it's a wide range of topics, but your insights were very helpful. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
You too.
For a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning, Do-yeon.
Let's start in the Indian Himalayas, where tragedy has struck following an avalanche.
Well, that's right. At least 10 people have been killed and 17 are still missing following an avalanche on Tuesday. Now, the victims were part of a team of mountaineers consisting of 34 trainers and 7 instructors. Now, the group was located in an area of the range in the Uttarakhand province when the avalanche struck. So far, 14 mountaineers have been rescued, while the search has resumed for those missing after a pause overnight due to rain and snow. Now, the incident comes over a week after a well-known climber died after a fatal fall in the Nepali Himalayas, while another avalanche just days later on a lower part of the same peak saw another hiker killed. Now, Hungary's capital Budapest saw roads blocked on Wednesday by around 10,000 protesters calling for better wages for teachers. The rally started with students forming a human chain several kilometers long and then grew into the largest protest in the country since Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban won his April re-election. The rally was also held for teachers fired for striking last week. The Hungarian government has argued that it can't raise teachers' wages as the EU hasn't released COVID-19 recovery funds. The EU, meanwhile, says it is withholding these funds due to worries over corruption. Now, a joint launch between NASA and SpaceX has blasted off, carrying 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut to the International Space Station. Taking off from Florida on Wednesday, 12 p.m. local time, the Crew 5 mission is SpaceX's 5th carried out on behalf of NASA. SpaceX's Crew Dragon spacecraft is set to dock with the ISS on Thursday after a 29-hour journey. Then the 4 space voyagers will spend 6 months in low orbit as they conduct over 200 science experiments. The crew is made up of 2 members from the US, 1 from Japan, and another from Russia. The mission marks the first time in 20 years that a Russian cosmonaut has been launched into space aboard a US space rocket. And finally, Spain and Portugal have welcomed Ukraine in their joint bid to host the 2030 Football World Cup. The official announcement was made Wednesday during a news conference at UEFA headquarters. Spain and Portugal initially began their joint bid in June last year. However, the president of the Spanish Football Federation said the bid is now better than before. The partners are likely to face competition from the 2 other joint bids, including one from Uruguay, Argentina, Paraguay and Chile, and another from Egypt, Greece and Saudi Arabia. FIFA says they will decide the 2030 hosts at the 74th FIFA Congress in 2024.
Good morning, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with the latest weather updates. It feels like all of a sudden things have switched to very autumn-like weather conditions. And today will be pretty much a repeat of yesterday's murky and chilly weather. Chillier, as a matter of fact, so please have your jacket and umbrella with you. Easterly winds are dropping heavy rain in the east of Gangwon-do province, with a heavy rain advisory issued there, and up to 120 millimeters of rain is expected into tomorrow. East Coast regions should brace for on and off rain through tomorrow as well, while the capital and the rest of the country could also see spotty rain passing by during the day today. Morning temperatures in central regions are hovering below 15 degrees Celsius this morning. Then afternoon highs will be 1 to 3 degrees lower than season norms. Daegu and Gwangju will notice a slight rise in highs this afternoon compared to yesterday, topping out at 22 degrees Celsius. Nationwide rain is in the forecast on Sunday afternoon, and central regions and Jeollado provinces will see rain into Monday, which is a temporary holiday here in Korea. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for our Friday's edition at the same time. Please stay with Arirang News, though, for more updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.